Alright guys, so we are going to be doing a Photoshop experiment to show how to take a graphic and paint it over someone's face. So what you're going to need to do is have an image saved of someone's face and an image, a graphic image that you created, and you're just going to open both of those. So my two are right here named headshot and image. So in Photoshop you're going to do file open instead of file new, and it'll open up your face, and then my image graphic is just this one with a quote. You want it to be some sort of wording and illustration because it'll make it look more interesting. So I'm going to crop this right away and make sure up here in the top that it is 8.5 by 11 in 300 ppi, and I'm just going to move her so that way she's perfectly centered. It'll make it easier in the long run if you do it this way. So once you have that done, the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to turn this into a smart object. So over here you can see I have background and it's locked. In the top of my layers panel, I'm going to click on that menu and go to convert to smart object. This is different than rasterizing because this keeps its original properties, whereas rasterizing makes it so we can delete and manipulate pixels. Now I'm going to make a double of this. So I'm going to click on that menu again and go to duplicate layer. Notice that I'm going to the top of my menu, my layers panel, to click on that menu. I'm not right clicking on this layer. And the reason we want to duplicate layer that way is it's going to pop up and ask us to do it in a window. You want to click on that document and go to new and then name it displacement and then say okay. And what it does is it opens it up into a totally new panel up here. So this is my original image, and now this is my displacement image. So we want to just blur this a little bit, so I'm going to filter in the top and then blur and Gaussian blur. And you want to do it so that way it looks like she's just a little bit fuzzy, so everyone's picture will be different. You don't want it to be like that fuzzy. You want it to be, you know, a little bit down further. So I think for mine, I'm going to set it right around 6. And then down here in the bottom of my layers panel, I'm going to click on this adjustment. So it's that half black, half white circle, and go in and click on black and white. Now this panel is going to pop up. If it doesn't, just make sure you click on it for properties. And you just want to adjust it so that way you have a good amount of blacks and whites, right? So I don't want it to be overly exposed like that. I don't want it to be too dark. You just want to get it kind of right in the middle. So that way you have an even amount. I want to make sure those shadows are really nice and dark, but that the highlights are still there where they need to be. So once you get that looking how you want, you're just going to go to File and Save As, and you want to save it to your folder and make sure it's named Displacement and saving as a Photoshop file, and then go ahead and hit Save. Yours shouldn't ask to replace, that's just mine because I've done this a couple times. So then from there, you can actually close this displacement tab. Make sure you're only closing that displacement tab, and it should pop you right back over into your headshot layer, or whichever one was open last. So on your person, we want to select just her or his face. So I'm going to use my quick selection tools and just really quickly kind of jump and select her face. It selected a little bit too far, so I'm going to come up here and click on that minus button. And I want to subtract her ears because I don't want to paint on her ears. And I also don't want to paint her hair. So once I get those marching ants going generally around her face, I'm going to click on this select and mask button up in the top. And it's going to pop us into this new tab. You can change your view here, so I can change it to just her face if I want to. Anything else. We want to do the overlay one. And then in your edge detection, so some of these might be closed like this, you want to make sure that edge detection is open. And you're going to click on Smart Radius. And then using your tools here, you can click back and forth between the minus and the plus. And what you want it to do is it's going to recognize for you for pieces of her hair and things like that. You don't want it to jump too far like that. If it does, you can just Command Z and step your way back. If you get the plus sign one, I can add back in parts of her face. And you just want to get it so that way it's going generally around, whoops, wrong one, generally around her face and not grabbing any of her hair or too many of the shadows. Once you get that how you want, you can, in the global requirements, just feather it a little bit. So that's going to make it just a little bit looser around the edges. And then down in output settings, where it says output to, you want to change it from selection to layer mask. And then click OK. And you'll notice it immediately adds that layer mask onto your layer right there. So we're going to go into our adjustments down here again, and we're going to add another black and white. And then you're going to click on your layer mask here and drag it up on top of that layer mask in black and white. It's going to ask you to replace layer mask. Click yes. And what that does is it keeps her face just black and white, but the rest of her comes back. So from there, we are going to just add back in her eyes, because right now if we place something on top of this, it would look like we had painted on her eyes. And if you have someone who's smiling where you can see their teeth, you're going to want to do that on, fix it on their teeth too, because we don't want to look like we painted their teeth. So make sure you click on that layer mask right here. And then using just your brush, you can change its size with those bracket keys. Remember, when black is in front, we can paint back in. So I'm just going to very quickly paint back in over her eyes and her eyelids, using my brackets to adjust for places that I do not want to look like it's been face painted. So again, if you have someone who's smiling, if they're wearing glasses, maybe you want to paint this on their glasses frame. She's not smiling with teeth, but if I wanted to, I could paint back in her lips here, so that way her lips stay regular color. Any place that you want to look like it's been empty or doesn't have that face paint on it, you're gonna want to paint over. All right, so once you get her eyes and her mouth back, you're gonna go ahead and bring your image over into your headshot. So I'm gonna again go to the top of that layers panel and click on that menu and go to convert to smart object. And then I'm just gonna click with my move tool and drag up to that tab and let go inside of my new document. And then Command T to resize it. I'm holding Shift and Alt at the same time to resize my graphics. That way it takes up the majority of the page. I'm going to lower that opacity down just so I can see a little bit better. And I'm going to keep adjusting this just until I get it generally in the right place. I want to make sure that my quote is covering the majority of her face. It's okay if it extends further past outside of that, because that's what the layer mask is for. So once you get the sizing right, we have to do a couple things to it. The first thing is we're going to distort it. So make sure that you are on your layer for your image and go to Filter, Distort, Pinch. And that pinch, if I zoom out in here, it's going to show you a little preview of what you want it to be. So you want to make it so that way it just matches a little bit. So if you have someone who maybe is opening their mouth or has their nose protruding further, you're going to want it to pinch a little bit wider out or in, depending on if they're making a funny face. You want it to look generally the right amount to fit whatever their face is, and you can see how it manipulated my graphic there. So I'm going to adjust this because I want to make sure that the U is fitting on her face, and I'm not losing any part of the quote. So I'm going to do Command T. It's going to tell me that it's going to take off this pinch just while I'm transforming it so I can see it better, and that's why you want it to be a smart object so it remembers that. So it looks like my pinch is gone, and I'm just going to readjust this a little bit so that way my graphic comes in. And once I hit enter again, you can see my pinch comes back. So my U is still hanging off just a little bit, so I'm going to Command T again. And maybe just squeeze in a smidge, maybe a smidge from the bottom, and then hit enter. And there it goes. So that's pretty much better. So now I have it sizing right. I'm going to bring my opacity up to about 50. And then where it says normal, I'm going to go down to color burn. And it's going to kind of place it around that space. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to distort this so that way it takes up the curves of her face. So like around her nose, it would pick up those curves. So this is where your displacement map comes in. So I'm going to go to Filter, Distort, Displace. I want it to be by 5 on both horizontal and vertical. Make sure it's stretched to fit and that it repeat edge pixels, and then press OK. It's going to pop up and ask me to pick a file, and this is where you go and pick your displacement that you save. So I'm going to Desktop and then Displacement and OK, or Open. It's going to take a little minute. And you can see some things just shifted a little bit. You can see it shifted around the wrinkle of her eyebrows there, a little bit around her nose. And we want to just make sure that it trims so that way it's not getting any of this extra outside of it. So I'm going to click on my layer mask down here and hold Alt on my keyboard and then click and drag and make sure I'm dragging that mask itself, and then let go when I'm above the layer 1 that has my image in it. You can see how it trimmed everything to fit in my selection. I'm going to click on that top layer and go into my adjustments, and then I'm going to add a vibrance adjustment. And I want to make sure that this only affects what's in this layer. So I'm going to, again, click on that mask, hold Alt, and click and drag up to vibrance, so that way I'm making a copy of it. it's going to ask me to replace again. I'm going to say yes. Then I'm going to click on my vibrance layer and pull that vibrancy up. You want to make those colors pop that were in there originally. And then my saturation I'm also going to pull up, and you can see it starts adding color back into her cheeks and into her face. So you just can kind of mess with your coloring a little bit on this. You can see because of where we erased, it made sure not to put it anywhere. So her lips are completely empty, her eyes are empty. If she had teeth, her teeth would be empty. And it's bending really nicely around places like her nose. So you just have to kind of mess with your settings a little bit so that way it starts working on its own to take those shapes that you would want it to be. And you can go in and mess with the coloring of her herself if you want to. So if you go into your image adjustments here, you could adjust maybe the vibrancy or saturation of her skin on its own. You can see how I'm adjusting all of it for all of her picture now to make it match. So it's up to you to try and make it look like it's part of it and look like it's been painted on her face. Once you finish your example one though, go ahead and export and turn that into Schoology.